the night Petra's husband stopped answering his phone, was the same night their daughter stopped breathing. That's how Petra would describe it later, in a voice that had gone completely flat. Not because she was trying to be dramatic, but because that was simply how the memory lived inside her. Two things happening at once. One door closing, another slamming shut forever. Petra Wyndham was 31 years old when her life split in two, before that Tuesday in November, and after. She had married Colin Wyndham 6 years earlier, in a small ceremony outside Charlottesville, Virginia, under a grove of oak trees that her mother had insisted on, because she said oak trees meant something permanent. Petra had believed that. She had believed a lot of things back then. That love was enough, that a man who cried at their wedding vows was a man worth trusting, that the way Colin looked at her across a crowded room meant he would always find his way back to her. They had a daughter named Iris, 3 years old. Red hair, like Petra's mother. A laugh that made strangers stop on the sidewalk and smile without knowing why. Iris had a severe peanut allergy. They had known since she was 18 months old. Every birthday party was negotiated in advance. Every restaurant was called ahead. Every grocery bag was checked twice. Petra kept an EpiPen in her purse, one in the car, one in the kitchen drawer beside the dish towels, and one in Iris's bag at daycare. Colin knew all of this. He had been there when the allergist explained it. He had nodded solemnly and said, "We'll be I promise." Petra had believed that too. The Tuesday it happened, Petra was supposed to have book club. She had been looking forward to it for weeks. 2 hours away from the house, away from the dishes, away from the particular kind of quiet that had settled over their marriage in recent months, a quiet she kept telling herself was just tiredness and not something worse. She had kissed Iris goodbye, told Colin dinner was in the fridge, and driven to her friend Danielle's house on the other side of town. She came back early because she had a headache. Not because she sensed something. Not because of any mother's intuition the way people would later suggest. She just had a headache and she wanted her own bed. She found Iris on the kitchen floor. Iris had gotten into the pantry. There were crackers scattered around her. Crackers that Petra had not bought. Crackers she had never seen before. Crackers she would later find out Colin had brought home 2 days earlier because they were on sale. Crackers that contained peanut flour listed 6th in the ingredients. Iris was conscious but barely. Her face was swollen. Her breathing was a sound Petra had never heard from a human being before and hopes, to this day, she never hears again. Petra grabbed the EpiPen from the drawer. She called 911 with one hand while she administered it with the other. She was talking to the dispatcher, watching Iris's chest, telling herself to breathe when it occurred to her that Colin was not in the house. She called him. It went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sent a text that said only, "Iris, ambulance, come now." She watched the road through the front window until the ambulance arrived. She climbed into the back with her daughter. She called Colin 4 more times on the way to the hospital. He did not answer any of them. The doctors at UVA Medical Center were good. Petra would say that clearly, always, to anyone who asked. The doctors were good. They worked fast. They told her the EpiPen had helped, that she had done the right thing, that a few more minutes and the outcome might have been different. But a few more minutes was not the same as no minutes at all. Iris died at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. She was 3 years old. She had red hair and a laugh that made strangers stop on the sidewalk. Petra sat in a chair beside the bed for a long time after. A nurse offered her water. A chaplain came in and then left again when Petra did not acknowledge him. At some point, someone turned the lights down lower. Colin arrived at 1:15 a.m. He had makeup on his collar. Petra noticed it immediately, the way you notice small wrong things when you're in shock. Your brain collecting evidence you're not ready to process. A faint print, coral-colored, just below his left ear. He said, "I just heard. I'm so sorry. My phone died." Petra looked at him. She said nothing. "I was at a work thing," he said, "a client dinner. There's no service in restaurant. It's in a basement. Go home," Petra said. "Petra, go home, Colin." He went. Petra's father, Everett Dunmore, had been a federal prosecutor for 26 years before he retired. He was 67 years old, broad-shouldered, slow-speaking, and possessed of a kind of patience that had always terrified the people across the table from him in a courtroom. He had spent his career building cases that were so precise, so complete, that juries almost never deliberated more than a day. He was not a loud man, he was not a dramatic man, but when Petra called him from the hospital that night, when she said the words in that flat, emptied-out voice, the silence that followed on his end of the line was not emptiness. It was calculation. He drove 4 hours from Richmond without stopping. He was at the hospital by dawn. He sat with Petra for a long time before he said anything. Then he asked one question: where was he? Petra said she didn't know yet. Everett nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "We'll find out." What Everett found out did not take long. He had spent 3 decades knowing which threads to pull. Colin Wyndham had not been at a client dinner. He had been at a hotel 30 minutes outside of Charlottesville with a woman named Sabrina Holtz, who was a regional sales director at the company where Colin worked as a senior account manager. The hotel had been booked under Sabrina's corporate card. Colin's car was in the parking garage. The timestamps from the keycard records showed he checked into the room at 6:44 p.m. Petra had called him for the first time at 9:22 p.m. He had been in that room for 2 hours and 38 minutes before his daughter stopped breathing. He had been in that room for 4 more hours after. Everett had a colleague pull the phone records quietly, as a favor, within the framework of what was legal and what was not technically a current investigation but could become one. When he showed Petra the timestamps printed on a single sheet of paper, she read them twice and then set the page down on her kitchen table very carefully, like it was something that might shatter. He saw the calls, she said. Yes, Everett said. He made a choice. Yes. Petra pressed her hands flat against the table. She did not cry. She had done most of her crying in the hospital, in that chair beside the bed in the small hours before Colin arrived. Now there was something harder in her, something her father recognized, because he had seen it in witnesses, in victims, in people who had crossed the line between grief and resolve and were not going back. What can we do? She asked. Everett looked at her for a long moment. A great deal, he said. The divorce was filed within 3 weeks. Petra had a good attorney. A woman named who had been trained under one of Everett's former colleagues and who had, according to Everett's quiet assessment, the kind of mind that doesn't let go. Colin contested nothing at first. He was still telling the story about the restaurant with no cell service. He told it to his mother, to his brother, to the few mutual friends who reached out. He told it with a consistency that suggested he had practiced it, which Everett found almost insulting. The idea that Colin believed the story needed practice rather than abandonment. Colin hired an attorney of his own, a man from a firm in downtown Charlottesville who mostly handled commercial real estate disputes and who was, in Everett's estimation, unprepared for what was about to happen. What happened was this. Everett, now technically acting as a private citizen and also as Petra's father, reached out to a contact at the state licensing board. Colin was a licensed securities representative. His conduct was subject to professional standards that included, among other provisions, a clause related to moral character and fitness. Everett had written that clause, as it happened, as part of a regulatory working group 15 years earlier. He knew exactly where the edges were. A complaint was filed, not by Everett directly, by a colleague of a colleague, through the appropriate channels, citing the hotel records, the phone records, and the timeline of events on the night of November 12th. Colin's license was suspended pending review within 6 weeks. Sabrina Holtz, who had continued seeing Colin through the initial weeks of the divorce proceedings, a fact that Petra found more bewildering than hurtful, the sheer brass of it, was contacted by her company's HR department regarding a complaint filed by another employee about the use of a corporate card for personal accommodations. Sabrina had expensed the hotel. The receipt showed 2 breakfast charges. Her supervisor found this relevant to a broader pattern of expense account irregularities that had apparently gone unaddressed. She was placed on unpaid leave. Neither of these things brought Iris back. Petra knew that. She said it out loud sometimes, to her therapist, to Danielle, to herself in the car on long drives. Nothing will bring her back. And she still wanted every single thing that happened next to happen exactly the way it did. The civil lawsuit was Everett's idea, but Petra agreed to it without hesitation. The theory of the case was this. Colin had been the supervising parent that evening. He had known about Iris's allergy. He had introduced a contraindicated food item into the home without informing Petra. He had been unreachable during a medical emergency for which his negligence was a proximate cause, and his reason for being unreachable, an extramarital affair, did not change any of the legal analysis, but it was relevant to the question of willful disregard. The lawsuit named Colin. It also named Sabrina Holtz, on a theory of interference that Petra's attorney presented with more confidence than some of the case law strictly supported, but which no one moved to dismiss in the early stages. Colin's attorney, the commercial real estate man, requested a continuance. Then another. Then he withdrew from the case, citing a conflict of interest he declined to specify. Colin hired a new attorney who was sharper and who understood finally that this was not a situation that would resolve quietly. It did not resolve quietly. The deposition of Colin Wyndham lasted 9 hours across 2 days. Everett sat in the room for both sessions. He did not speak. He simply sat across the table with his hands folded and his expression neutral, and Colin's new attorney kept objecting to things that Petra's attorney had not yet finished saying. By the second day, Colin looked like a man who had not slept in weeks, which was, by that point, accurate. In the deposition, Colin was asked to describe, in precise detail, the sequence of events on the evening of November 12th. He was asked about the crackers. He was asked when he had purchased them. He was asked whether he had read the label. He said he didn't remember. He was asked whether he had been informed of the severity of Iris's allergy. He said yes. He was asked whether he understood that peanut flour was a derivative product that could appear in unexpected food items. He said he wasn't a nutritionist. Everett did not react to this. Petra did not react to this. Petra's attorney underlined something in her notes and moved on. 6 months after Iris died, Colin's license was formally revoked. The licensing board found that his conduct on the night of November 12th demonstrated a pattern of recklessness and sustained disregard for the welfare of a dependent that was incompatible with the standards of his profession. He lost his position at the firm 2 weeks before the board's decision, when the internal investigation triggered by the licensing complaint uncovered a separate matter involving client communications he had handled irregularly. The firm did not use the word fraud in their termination letter. They didn't need to. Sabrina returned from unpaid leave to find that her position had been restructured. The restructuring was real. The company was reorganizing that division, but the timing was, as one of Everett's contacts described it privately, not coincidental. She resigned 6 weeks later. She moved to another city. Petra did not follow what happened to her after that. She had decided at a certain point that Sabrina had taken up enough space in her mind and was not entitled to more. The civil case settled 8 months after filing. Colin did not have the assets he once had. The license, the job, the steady income had all collapsed within the same season. But the settlement was structured to include his half of the marital home, his investment accounts, and a payment plan that his attorney spent 2 days negotiating down to terms that Colin could theoretically meet. Petra's attorney called her when it was final. She was sitting in her car in the parking lot of the grocery store. She had started doing that, sitting in parking lots to collect herself, because the grocery store was still hard, the cracker aisle specifically, and she allowed herself 5 minutes before and after to just exist without having to perform okayness for anyone. She said, "Is it done?" Her attorney said, "It's done." Petra sat there for a while longer. Then she went inside and bought the things she needed, and drove home to the house she was keeping, the one with the oak tree in the backyard that Iris had learned to say the word tree for, pointing at it through the kitchen window every morning. People asked Everett, later, whether he felt any satisfaction. Old colleagues, friends from his prosecutorial years, people who had watched the whole thing unfold and knew what he'd done and how he'd done it. They expected him to say something measured, something about justice being its own reward. He always says the same thing: "My daughter is still in pain every day. There's no satisfaction in that." And then, after a moment, "But he deserved every single thing that happened to him, and she deserved a father who showed up." That was all he said about it. He was not a dramatic man. Petra went back to work eventually. She had been a hospital administrator before. Scheduling, operations, the unglamorous infrastructure that keeps medical systems from collapsing. And she returned to it because she was good at it and because having to think clearly about concrete problems was, for her, a form of staying alive. She saw a therapist every week. She ran, badly, in the mornings. She called her father on Sundays. On what would have been Iris's 4th birthday, Petra planted a red maple in the backyard, near the oak tree. She did it alone, early in the morning before the neighborhood was fully awake, digging in the hard November ground with a shovel that was slightly too short for her, and taking twice as long as it should have. When she was done, she sat on the back steps with muddy hands and looked at the 2 trees and let herself feel everything she normally kept managed and organized and boxed away. She did not post about it. She did not explain it to anyone. She just sat there and breathed and stayed. Colin, by that same November, was living in a rented room in another part of the state, working a position that had nothing to do with finance, paying the settlement installments on a schedule that his own attorney had called optimistic. Sabrina sat somewhere else. The hotel outside Charlottesville was still there, presumably. None of it mattered to Petra the way she thought it would. What mattered was the maple tree. What mattered was that she had found out, in the hardest possible way, that she was someone who could survive things she had previously believed would destroy her. What mattered was that when she had called her father from a hospital room at midnight with nothing left, he had driven 4 hours through the dark without hesitation and sat with her until there was something to do. And then he had done it. Some people never get that. A parent who shows up completely, who doesn't flinch, who doesn't ask you to be okay before you're ready, who simply stands between you and the worst of what the world has done and says quietly, without drama, "I see what happened, I know what it cost you, and we are not finished yet." Petra knew she had been lucky, in that specific and devastating way, lucky to have someone who loved her like that, even inside a year that had taken everything else. She held on to that. On the hard days, which were most days, she held on to that like it was the last solid thing. And slowly, in the way that is never linear and never clean and never the way the movies make it look, she rebuilt.